Hello! Look at us looking fresh-faced in the morning. We are here today to talk about June's by Buddy Read, which is Out of Order by Casey Lawrence. Out of Order is about our main character, protagonist person named Corey, who is in her last year of high school. She's a closeted bisexual, she's Vietnamese, she's going through all the regular end of high school stuff where she's running for valedictorian and going to prom, and she has these three other really close friends who they've all been friends since they were like children, and they're going through it all together. And on top of all of that, on their prom night, she witnesses her friend's murder. So let's start off by talking about the narrative structure of this book. So this is one of those books that starts off with the big terrible thing that happens right at the beginning. So like the first chapter is when she witnesses the brutal homicide of her friends. And then the rest of the book is told through a series of flashbacks that are spliced in between what's currently happening. In terms of that structure, there was positives and negatives, because at first, like when I started reading this book, I didn't really like it. I wasn't really feeling it, and I think that's because it starts off with the big terrible event thing, but you don't know who any of the characters are yet because you haven't gone through this series of flashbacks. So I didn't, like, it was upsetting to me, but I couldn't identify with Corey's anguish because I didn't know who they are. I didn't know what they meant to her. I didn't know their histories, their stories. But then as it progressed and it started getting into it, it was really good. There were some amazing moments of writing and sequences in terms of the events and how they were being told. While reading this book, I paid very close attention to the kinds of conversations the characters were having and how it was being dealt with. So let's go through them. Firstly, this book is set in high school, as I've already stated. And from personal memory, in high school, there is a lot of really cringy offensiveness, and you say a lot of things you don't realize are like deeply informed by your own prejudices based on race, gender, sexuality, class, etc. So one instance of this is when one character, Ricky, one of Corey's friends, is dealing with a breakup situation, I guess, where her boyfriend was cheating on her, or he got together with another girl right after they broke up, and she's like, he was definitely cheating on me. And so they're trying to all make her feel better, but one character, I forget who it is, decides that to make her feel better, she's going to say things like, "You're a strong, independent black woman who don't need no man," and well, it specifically states that she did the Z-snap. No one in that group is black. That's not, no. Another topic theme that runs through some of the characters' conversations is feminism, let's say, issues about gender, specifically like girl hate, etc. So in the same situation where they're comforting Ricky, they are very quick to ascertain that it is not the other girl's fault. Ricky's rage should not be directed to the woman that her recently ex-boyfriend is now seeing, but rather that he is the one being a shitty person. So I liked that. That was cool. I thought that was a good little moment. In a similar situation where they were flashing back to earlier in the year when Ricky had a pregnancy scare with the guy who was the boyfriend at the time. And they were having discussions about the need for a possible abortion, what she was going to do with the baby, etc. And one of the characters, Jessa, is very religious, and they make no doubt that she would have qualms about it. They were very quick to assert that it was not her uterus, so she doesn't really have a say. Like that's what they were telling Ricky, is they were like, it doesn't matter what Jessa thinks of you, this is your body, your uterus, you live your life, Jessa doesn't even have any valid opinions into what you're doing with your own body. And I was like, nice. But then what I also really liked is that they were also discussing how, because Jessa was their friend, she was like, she's not going to judge you right? Like, she's our friend, she will understand, she will be there for you, even if she doesn't agree with you for whatever reason. So I liked that there was this mix of people who often had conflicting views or things that they were dealing with and how they chose to deal with those things. There was tension, but in the end, they were all still friends. Now let's talk about race. So firstly, the composition of the friend group and all of like the main central characters. There is 2 white girls, Kate and Ricky. Jessa is described as being Latina, and then there's Corey, who's Vietnamese, like I said earlier. There were a lot of moments in this book which really pointed to what Corey was experiencing, being one of the only few non-white people in her small rural community town place, and the fact that she's like the generalization of being Asian and that kind of stuff. So like, for instance, she says things like, no one in a small town cares what flavor of Asian you are when you're one of 3 non-white students in your graduating class. And she's saying that in response to her friends saying something kind of casually racist about her not being good at math. Like, ugh. One of the other things she says when she's talking about her running for valedictorian, and I guess, spoiler alert, she wins valedictorian, but when she's kind of talking about the anxieties around it in terms of her race and her gender, one of the things that she says when she's kind of freaking out about it is, I was the only female applicant. Did everyone vote for me because they're sick of having straight white male valedictorians? Is this just affirmative action in action? Another thing I was paying attention to in terms of race is the way that characters are described through like explicit or implicit racial coding. Because one thing that I think is really important, and I've started to do a lot, I guess recently, is examine when I'm reading books whether or not a book is relying on default whiteness and who they are describing as being the other and not being the default. So this book makes it very clear when people aren't white, and it also kind of doesn't. There's a case where a paramedic who comes to the scene after the murder and she calls 911. She describes as having like dark skin and warm brown eyes. But there's also lots of characters who just weren't described at all, and so I was kind of like, is this default? I don't know. Because, for instance, her parents aren't described in any physical way or racial way, but her mother was described as having a long English nose, and I was kind of looking to see, you know, on the webs what that was coding for, just because I wasn't sure if there was some other implication, but everything that came up matched it with an aquiline nose, which is a distinctly like white feature. So in that case, like if her mother is white, her father's never described in terms of race, does that mean that she has like a dual or a biracial identity? Which, I mean, if it was, it's kind of, that would suck that that also isn't discussed in the book, because that's another whole specific thing. And the last thing is thigh stuff. What we're here for. So, just kidding, we're here for an intersection of things. Ileana, come on. So, I felt like bisexuality was dealt with very well in this book. It really deals with how terrible other people are about dealing with your suspected sexuality. So just people always like assuming that she's a lesbian and making jokes about her like being in the closet, or like, oh, she doesn't want to come out of the closet yet. Like, we really think you're lesbian. Like, we're totally okay with it, but like, you're a lesbian and you should come to terms with it like on our terms, because like we're already, you know, just things stuff like that. She has so many conversations like in her head, or being like, I could have said something like, you know, bisexuality is real and that exists, or like, hey, maybe I'm bisexual. Did you ever think of that? Even the brief conversations about what bisexuality was. So for instance, when she's talking like to Kate about it and they're trying to kind of work through what they're both feeling, Corey is like basically like, I am attracted to the multiplicity of genders. Brief conversations like that would have literally changed my life if I had read this when I was like 14, 15. Like, it literally would have changed my life, because I had zero exposure to bisexuality. And then when I did, it was famous women who were apparently doing it for attention and to be overtly sexual and whatever. I also didn't like the conclusion of the crime, of the homicide that was committed. I understand what she was trying to do with the narrative, and it, like, I guess it made sense narratively, but it didn't make sense to me, like, logically. I feel like it kind of came out of nowhere. I feel like there were some things that didn't really, like, add up or make sense. I didn't like how the crime itself, the conclusion of the crime, I didn't like how that went down. I do like how the book ended though. I like the note that it ended on. But yeah, I wasn't a fan of the wrap-up of the crime. So that was June's by Buddy Read. For July, we are going to continue with the theme of YA queer stuff, and we're going to be doing Beauty Queens by Lippa Bray.